Now tell me, Brooklyn, when did you last see your son?
Oh, about 20 years ago, Father. He was about 4 years old, little kid.
Well, we have invited him here tonight.
No.
Yes.
The Benny Hill Show was one of the most influential television programs in entertainment history, reaching audiences across 97 countries over a span of more than 30 years. At the height of its popularity in 1971, the show attracted an astounding 31 million viewers. While audiences laughed at the obvious jokes and slapstick humor, they were often unaware of the many clever technical tricks, visual gags, and subtle details hidden throughout each episode. Many of these finer points have gone unnoticed since the show first aired, waiting to be discovered by viewers who take the time to look more closely. One of the most frequently used visual tricks on The Benny Hill Show was something called the wraparound effect. This gag appeared so often that viewers eventually accepted it as just another part of the show's comedy style. The wraparound effect worked like this. A performer would run off the left side of the television screen and then immediately reappear running back onto the right side, as if the screen itself wrapped around in a circle. This wasn't a mistake or bad editing. Hill deliberately borrowed this trick from old silent films and cartoons because it created the impression that the performers existed in a strange circular universe where space folded back on itself. The wraparound effect became most famous during the chase scenes that played while the song Yakety Sax was playing. However, viewers who paid close attention could spot this gag in regular sketches too. Sometimes a performer would run out through a door on the left side of the screen and then suddenly run back in through a completely different door on the right side, completely ignoring the rules of physical space and logic. Hill was essentially using the same kind of physics that would later become common in video games, decades before those games existed. The gag worked so well because audiences would be laughing too hard to stop and think about how impossible it was. They simply watched the absurd visuals unfold and kept laughing without questioning what they were seeing. Hill used this trick repeatedly within any single 30-minute episode, sometimes repeating the gag anywhere from 5 to 15 times. By using it so frequently, he wore down the audience's ability to question or analyze what they were seeing, allowing them to simply enjoy the chase scenes without interruption. The repeated exposure made the impossible seem normal within the context of the show's universe. Another key element that made the chase scenes so memorable was a camera technique that most viewers never consciously noticed. The frantic, sped-up quality of those famous chase scenes wasn't just actors running fast. It was achieved through a filming technique called undercranking, which means shooting at a slower frame rate than normal. While standard filming happens at 24 frames per second, Hill's crew would film these scenes at only 18 to 21 frames per second. When this slower footage was played back at normal speed, it created a rapid, jerky movement that made the actors look almost cartoonish as they ran away from their pursuers. This undercranking technique originated in the silent film era, when camera operators had to manually crank the cameras by hand. The Keystone Cops comedies from that era were a huge influence on Benny Hill, and he loved those old movies so much that he embraced their filming techniques. Most audience members never understood why the action looked different or moved so strangely. They simply sensed that something humorous was happening on screen. Hill even varied the filming speed within the same shot sometimes, filming some actors at the slower speed while filming others at regular speed. This created even more visual chaos in comedy. Beyond the technical tricks, The Benny Hill Show also served as an early platform for performers who would later become famous. The show had a regular cast of performers, and several of them eventually achieved significant international fame, though audiences watching the original broadcasts had no idea these people would become stars. Jane Leeves is a perfect example of this phenomenon. She joined the cast in the early 1980s as one of the dancers known as Hill's Angels. Later, she gained worldwide recognition for playing Daphne Moon on the American sitcom Frasier. When she appeared on The Benny Hill Show, she was just one of many background dancers performing choreographed routines. Most viewers paid very little attention to these dancers because their focus was on Hill's antics in the foreground. The show has created something of a modern treasure hunt for today's viewers. By going back and watching old episodes, people can now spot many familiar faces who appeared on the show before they became famous. Throughout the show's run, Benny Hill employed hundreds of extras, choreographed dancers, and various bit players. Many of these early performers were struggling actors willing to take any work they could find. By carefully studying the backgrounds of old episodes, it's now possible to recognize future stars who were just starting their careers. Occasionally, Hill would also allow already successful performers to make cameo appearances on the show, though these were usually clearly indicated. The performers who appeared for just one episode and received payment from Hill often remain unknown unless they achieved success elsewhere later. While The Benny Hill Show always presented itself as a professionally produced television program, it actually contained quite a few real mistakes that made it on the air. These weren't staged blooper reel-type gags meant to be funny. They were genuine errors that slipped past quality control. Attentive viewers could often spot things like crew members reflected in mirrors, shadows of crew members appearing where they shouldn't be, and props failing at the worst possible moments. Since Hill preferred to shoot most scenes in just one take, many of these mistakes became permanent parts of the sketches. Rather than spending money to reshoot sequences because of minor mistakes, the editors figured that audiences would be too focused on the main action to notice small errors in the background. One very common type of mistake involved background extras or secondary performers breaking character. During large musical numbers or chase scenes, you could sometimes see secondary performers stop moving, stare directly into the camera, or suddenly react to something happening off-camera. With dozens of people working together in the typically fast-paced environment that The Benny Hill Show created, achieving flawless takes was nearly impossible. The editors simply determined that audiences would be too focused on what was happening in the foreground to notice these minor background problems. Prop mishaps provided another source of unintentional comedy. Doors would get stuck, signs would fall over too soon, or costume pieces would come undone. Sometimes these accidents actually enhanced the comedic impact. On occasion, Hill would incorporate these mishaps into his own performance, reacting to accidents as if they were part of his planned comedy routine. Every episode of The Benny Hill Show featured walls covered with graffiti that told their own stories. These weren't random scribbles. The graffiti artists created fake conversations on the walls in a question-and-answer format. Show producers included them as part of a hidden joke script for viewers who took the time to look closely. Most viewers focused on the main action and never noticed these wall jokes. One example showed a question asking why bees hum, followed by the punchline that they don't know the lyrics. Another wall displayed a question asking about the difference between a good girl and trash, followed by the answer that trash comes out once per week, and then a final comment saying, "Not here." Most of these graffiti conversations appeared during sketches with outdoor chase scenes, where viewers could only see them for a brief moment as characters rushed past. Hill took inspiration from silent movie title cards to use walls in this manner, essentially turning static background elements into moving storytelling elements. The jokes on the walls existed separately from the main sketches, but they contributed to building the overall comedic atmosphere, creating a world where humor filled every bit of available space. Most people who watched the show during its original run never took time to read the jokes written on the walls. Later home video releases and streaming services revealed just how densely packed with comedy each frame actually was. The music on The Benny Hill Show also contained hidden elements that most viewers never noticed. Anyone familiar with the show automatically thinks of yakety sax, the frenetic theme music used during chase scenes. However, few people realize that yakety sax isn't just one catchy melody. It's actually a masterful combination that incorporated snippets of other recognizable tunes so seamlessly that even regular listeners remained unaware of their presence. The piece samples "Chicken Reel," which is a traditional American folk song. It even sneaks in a couple of bars from Entrance of the Gladiators, better known as circus clown entrance music. These elements were incorporated from the very beginning. James Spider Rich wrote Yakety Sax in 1963 specifically for an event in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. When Ronnie Aldrich later covered the tune for the Benny Hill Show, he made sure to keep these subtle elements intact. The carnival tune that bursts forth during chaotic chase scenes helps enhance the sense of pandemonium, while the clips from Chicken Reel add a carnival-like feeling to the sketches. Most viewers didn't consciously recognize these borrowed melodies. They just heard a fun, familiar-sounding tune and didn't understand why it connected with them on such a deep emotional level. The song's hidden power came from tunes that audiences subconsciously recognized without realizing it. Benny Hill employed many clever visual techniques involving signs that changed meaning when partially hidden by props or other objects. In one example, Hill stood beside a sign that read, "Homes for Rent," while several attractive women walked through the front door of a building. After they entered, a woman came out and slapped Hill. Only then would viewers realize that a flap on the sign would reveal the sign actually read, "Homes Toilet," which is the French word for men's restroom. The joke worked because viewers couldn't see the change in the sign during the sketch until it was revealed. These partially hidden sign gags appeared frequently throughout the show. They tended to sit in the background while foreground action took place, or they would swing into view from doorways. Signs reading "Finest Antiques" might suddenly reveal themselves to say something completely different. People focusing their attention on faces and action would miss these background changes. The genius was all about timing. By the time the punchline was revealed, viewers should have already been looking at the prop or sign for several seconds, but the physical comedy in Hill's routine was so engaging that very few people managed to notice these details. The gag wouldn't have worked if British audiences weren't already familiar with reading non-verbal communication and visual puns. One of Hill's cleverest running gags involved large poster boards placed beside doors. These boards would contain 6 or 7 sentences stacked vertically. The sentences appeared completely innocent when you read them normally. However, when Hill performed near these signs, he would swing the door open to block most of the text from view, revealing only the first letter of each sentence. When you read just those first letters from top to bottom, they spelled out an inappropriate word that created the punchline. Audiences would first see what looked like a legitimate sign or notice and would have no idea anything more existed. Creating these gags required enormous planning to ensure that each sentence made grammatical sense while also having the right starting letter to spell out the intended word. The signs needed to be positioned exactly right, so the door would block just the right amount of text. This type of visual wordplay appeared dozens of times throughout the series, but most viewers only understood what happened after the door had already opened and closed. These gags happened so quickly that most people wouldn't recognize what had occurred after the skit finished. One of Benny Hill's most iconic recurring characters was Fred Scuttle. Fred appeared in many sketches wearing wire-rimmed granny glasses and a military-style cap worn sideways on his head. Most fans paid no attention to Fred's silly salute, but military viewers would have noticed something wrong. Fred always saluted with his open palm facing forward, which is exactly opposite to British military protocol. British Army regulations require the palm to face inward towards the temple, not outward towards the viewer like an American salute. Fred's backward salute was a deliberate choice by Benny Hill to define the character as someone with good intentions who was simply confused or an accidental fool. Fred's incorrect salute appeared in every single Fred Scuttle sketch for over 15 years, from his first appearance to his last in the series. Hill maintained this consistency religiously, understanding that such details, no matter how small, create recognition and trust with audiences. The slanted hat added another dimension to the joke. Fred Scuttle's entire military appearance was utterly wrong in every respect. He wore no insignia, no crest, no badges, and no buttons. His boots weren't polished, and his tunic was a light civilian color. Yet he wore them with absolute confidence. His trademark entrance involved stumbling or tripping along behind the interviewer, usually Henry McGee, before popping into that distinctive wrong salute. Jackie Wright, the bald Irishman who became one of the most beloved characters on The Benny Hill Show, received countless head smacks from Benny Hill throughout the program. Whenever this happened, Wright had a very specific response that appeared repeatedly throughout different episodes. Whenever Benny tapped or drummed on Wright's bald head or on a helmet Wright was wearing, Wright would immediately stop what he was doing and say, "Stop dancing up there." This exact phrase appeared in numerous different episodes across various sketches. The most well-known version occurred in a sketch where Jackie wore a standard helmet when Benny drummed on it. The same line also appeared in the Scuttle Space Race sketch, where Wright wore a glass fishbowl-style helmet. The repetition of this specific response became a sort of inside joke among dedicated viewers. It suggested a possible connection among all of Jackie Wright's various comedy characters, hinting that perhaps they were all the same confused fellow experiencing similar situations repeatedly. Most people didn't pick up on this repeated verbal reaction. It was actually Jackie Wright's personal trademark that added to, rather than detracted from, the physical humor. It was a small detail that proved effective in a show filled with such irreverent zaniness. Benny Hill employed a consistent and surprising device to demonstrate how easily someone can make a mistake while entering another person's room or apartment. The setup for this routine followed a similar pattern each time. A person would burst into a hotel or apartment room only to discover a couple in bed. They would quickly realize they were in the wrong place and react with embarrassment. Usually, the embarrassed person would take a quick glance at the room number on the way out. The most effective part of this gag was that audiences understood what happened without needing any music or dialogue to explain it. What made this work was a special prop that Hill's production company created called rotating number plates. Unlike normal number plates that are permanently attached to doors, these special plates could rotate to show different numbers. The gag was funny because audiences recognized the essential elements without any explanation. They understood that the person in the sketch had entered the wrong room due to a rotating number and felt embarrassed. What viewers didn't realize was that this exact same joke occurred repeatedly throughout various episodes and situations. Sometimes Hill was the confused intruder, and other times it was other cast members. The locations varied between hotels, apartment complexes, and office buildings, but the ever-rotating number plate remained the same. Bob Todd was one of the tall, dignified regular performers on The Benny Hill Show who became well known for hilariously portraying drunk characters. In scene after scene, Todd would appear very tipsy, lumbering around while carrying a bottle of whiskey and taking huge gulps of what appeared to be real alcohol. However, if you examined these bottles closely, you would notice that the contents were too light and too clear to be actual whiskey. If you watched these scenes in slow motion or close up, it became apparent that the liquid in the bottles was actually orange or apple juice rather than whiskey or even the tea that many film productions use as a whiskey substitute. The giveaway became even more obvious when Todd poured his drink into a glass, as you could sometimes see pieces of pulp floating in the liquid. None of this mattered to the performance because Bob Todd was so completely committed to his character in every scene. His stumbling, his slurred speech, and his drunken swagger were so convincing that audiences never doubted he was drinking real alcohol. The audience's brain automatically filled in the blank. There were also practical production reasons for using juice instead of alcohol or tea. These scenes typically required multiple takes, and it wouldn't have been safe for any actor to consume multiple doses of real alcohol. Tea would stain teeth and change color under studio lighting, but apple or orange juice looked fine on camera and was completely safe to drink repeatedly. During a space-themed Fred Scuttle interview sketch, Jackie Wright appeared wearing an enormous glass fishbowl as a helmet. Henry McGee, who played the straight man, asked the obvious question of whether Jackie could breathe while wearing that thing. Fred Scuttle answered with one of the show's greatest examples of dark comedy, but he delivered the line in such an offhand, cheerful manner that most of the audience thought it was just a regular joke. Fred answered happily by saying he thought so because his goldfish had stayed alive in it for approximately 3 weeks. The humor in this line operated on multiple levels. Viewers taking the comment at face value would recognize the obvious difference between what humans and fish need to survive. However, the deeper humor lay in Fred's use of past tense, which indicated that the goldfish was now dead. Essentially, Fred Scuttle was saying that as part of their safety testing for the fishbowl helmet, they had first tested it on a goldfish which died after 3 weeks, and somehow this was considered an acceptable result. The dark humor of this line was completely missed because of Hill's bright, matter-of-fact delivery, but this was one of the show's trademarks, delivering dark hints and messages in a cheerful, comedic manner. The fishbowl gag also worked on a visual level, because the confusion on Jackie Wright's face was magnified by the distorted view through the thick glass. Benny Hill became famous for playing multiple characters within the same sketch. Some of his best work involved scenes where he appeared as 2 or even 3 versions of himself simultaneously. Using split-screen photography and incredibly detailed planning, Hill created seamless conversations with himself that made many viewers believe he had a twin or body double working with him on set. This illusion required complete precision. The crew would first film one version of the scene while leaving empty space for the second version, then film the second version, and finally combine the 2 pieces of film together using an optical printer. Hill's performances were so convincing because he dramatically altered his voice, body position, and facial expressions for each character, maximizing the differences to help audiences focus on the characters rather than questioning the technique. Careful camera placement and strategic positioning of furniture also helped hide the fact that both versions of Hill were occupying the same physical space. Rather than showing romantic interactions explicitly, the Benny Hill show relied on clever visual metaphors. Whenever a sketch approached intimate moments, it would cut to symbolic images such as a washing machine going wild, a rocket launching, fireworks exploding, or other metaphors representing intimate connections. Audiences quickly learned to understand these rapid sequences without thinking too much about them. While Hill didn't invent this technique, as Hollywood had used similar approaches with crashing waves or closing doors, Hill took the concept further by making his montages faster, funnier, and more exaggerated than anyone had attempted before. He would show trains diving into tunnels, pistons pumping, and champagne corks flying. Each successive image built upon the previous one, creating an escalating sequence of symbolic references. What most viewers missed was the careful thought Hill put into creating each shot and arranging them in sequence. The tempo and build-up of these images helped establish the emotional and comedic rhythm of the scene. Even if viewers couldn't remember specific images, the overall sequence conveyed a clear progression of emotion and humor that everyone understood on an instinctive level. Benny Hill is often remembered as someone who chased scantily dressed women around parks and streets. However, a closer examination of the actual scenes reveals that in most cases, Hill was actually the one being chased. In the majority of chase sequences, he was the hapless victim fleeing from people he had angered or offended, whether it was an irate husband, angry women, or other upset individuals. The public's perception became reversed because promotional material and highlight reels focused on the most controversial images of Benny Hill chasing women. When you watch complete episodes, it becomes clear that Hill was almost always the victim of some innocent mistake or misunderstanding, running for his life from all the people he had upset. The people chasing him included police officers, chefs, nurses, elderly women with umbrellas, and sometimes the Hill's Angels dancers. But most often it was because Hill had accidentally caused trouble, rather than because he was romantically pursuing anyone. The common storyline involved Hill as a well-meaning, ordinary person who, through his own clumsiness or confusion, sparked community outrage. He might accidentally destroy a wedding cake, insult a gangster's wife, or cause a chain-reaction car accident through sheer incompetence. The resulting chase scene would feature everyone running after him, not the other way around. This one detail alone completely reverses the gender dynamics that many people associate with the show. Henry McGee served as the gentlemanly straight man on The Benny Hill Show, appearing in the role for many years. He was the polite interviewer who provided Hill with setup lines and logical support. He hosted the Fred Scuttle interviews, played various authority figures, and helped ground numerous sketches with his dignified presence on screen. However, what most viewers never realized was that Henry McGee also provided the show's most recognizable audio signature. The announcement at the beginning of each episode, "Yes, it's the Benny Hill Show," came directly from McGee rather than from a separate announcer, as many people assumed. This dual role remained hidden from viewers because McGee used such different vocal qualities and energy levels when serving as announcer versus when playing his straight man character in sketches. In his sketch work, McGee spoke with a measured, refined tone. For his announcer role, he unleashed a loud, enthusiastic voice that sounded like a completely different person. The show never highlighted this connection, never showed McGee in an announcer's booth, and never credited his voice work directly. McGee worked as the show's narrator from 1969 until 1989, opening each episode with his catchphrase before appearing as a character in the actual sketches. This hidden detail is just one more example of how The Benny Hill Show contained layers of cleverness that went unnoticed by casual viewers, but rewarded those who paid close attention.